Hello everyone, I'm the narrator. Today, I bring you a millionaire love story. A love that rises above all challenges. Where hearts find each other in a world of luxury. True wealth isn't just money. It's love that lasts. Do you believe in destined love? If so, like, share, comment, and subscribe to Millionaire Love Stories for more heart-touching stories. Now, let's step into this story together. Session 1. A marriage of convenience. The grandeur of the Whitmore estate was undeniable. Marble floors gleamed beneath towering chandeliers, casting golden light across the elegant dining room. The scent of freshly arranged lilies mixed with the rich aroma of aged wine. But none of it mattered to Logan Whitmore. He sat at the far end of the long mahogany table, shoulders stiff, fingers drumming against the polished surface. Across from him, his parents observed him with cool detachment. His father, William Whitmore, sipped his wine leisurely, while his mother, Eleanor Whitmore, sat upright, her piercing gaze fixed on him. The silence between them was suffocating. Finally, Logan broke it. "This isn't happening." His voice was calm, but the steel beneath it was unmistakable. His father merely sighed, swirling the wine in his glass as if his son's protest was nothing more than an inconvenience. "It's already done, Logan." Logan leaned back, exhaling sharply. "A marriage? With a woman I've never met? Do you realize how insane that sounds?" "You're not a child," his mother interjected, her voice crisp. "This is about the family. About the business. The Halversons are one of the most influential families in the financial world. An alliance with them strengthens our empire. A contract." Logan's lips curled into a bitter smirk. "You're dressing it up as a marriage. But it's nothing more than a business transaction." His mother's mouth thinned. "Call it what you want. But you'll be at that dinner tomorrow. And you will meet Sophie Halverson." Logan scoffed, shaking his head. "Is she even willing? Or is she being forced into this nightmare too?" "She understands the arrangement," his father said evenly. "And she's not some pawn." "Logan, Sophie is an intelligent, well-educated woman who comes from a prestigious lineage. Then why does she hide behind a veil?" Logan snapped. "What exactly is she keeping from me?" His mother's jaw tensed. "That's not your concern. It is if I'm expected to marry her." His father set his wine glass down with a soft clink, his patience fraying. "You'll do what is necessary." "Logan." His fingers curled into fists on the table. "And what if I refuse?" His father's gaze sharpened. "Then everything you have, the company, the wealth, the legacy, you walk away from it all." The room fell into a suffocating silence. Logan's breath came slow and measured. But inside, rage churned like a storm. His life had never been his own. And this was just another move in a game he never wanted to play. His mother stood, her delicate hands smoothing over her silk dress. "You don't need to love her, Logan," she said softly. "You just need to accept her." Logan rose from his chair abruptly. "I don't need any of this," he muttered before storming out of the dining room. But as he climbed the grand staircase to his room, he knew the truth. He could walk away, but at what cost? Tomorrow, he would meet Sophie Halverson, the woman who would become his wife. And Logan was prepared to hate every second of it. The next evening arrived too soon. Dressed in a tailored black suit, Logan entered the Halverson estate with his parents, the scent of fresh roses and expensive cologne filling the air. The estate was as grand as his own, ornate chandeliers, gilded mirrors, and an ambiance of controlled elegance. The Halversons welcomed them warmly, their smiles polished, their words rehearsed. It was nothing more than a performance. And Logan was tired of playing his part. And then, she arrived. A hush fell over the room as Sophie Halverson entered. She was dressed in an ivory gown, the fabric flowing like liquid silk around her. She carried herself with effortless grace, her posture poised, her movements unhurried. But it wasn't her gown that drew Logan's attention. It was the veil. The delicate lace obscured her face entirely, falling just past her shoulders. Only her eyes, a piercing, stormy gray, were visible beneath the sheer fabric. A veil, a barrier. Something about it unsettled Logan in a way he couldn't explain. "This is Sophie," her father announced, gesturing toward her. Sophie inclined her head, her voice steady, unwavering. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Logan." Logan hesitated before extending his hand. Her touch was cool, delicate, fleeting. "Likewise," he muttered, though conviction was absent from his tone. Dinner was an agonizing affair. Their parents carried the conversation while Logan and Sophie sat across from each other in silence. He found himself studying her, frustrated by the mystery surrounding her. Finally, unable to contain himself, he set his fork down and looked at her directly. "You don't have to keep that on. You know." The table stilled. Sophie's gray eyes met his through the veil. "Unreadable. I prefer to." Logan exhaled sharply. "Why? Are you hiding something?" "Logan," his mother hissed. Sophie remained poised, unfazed. "I'm not hiding anything that matters. That's for me to decide. Isn't it?" he challenged. Her lips parted slightly, but she didn't answer right away. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, as if assessing him. "This marriage is an arrangement," she said finally. "We both know why we're here. There's no need for unnecessary expectations." Her words were calm, but they carried weight, an unspoken message buried within them. Logan felt something shift in his chest. So that's how she saw this. No romance, no emotions, just an agreement. He should have been relieved. But instead, he felt something entirely unexpected. Frustration. He had expected resistance, maybe even pleading. But this quiet acceptance was something else entirely. And for the first time that evening, Logan found himself wondering, who exactly was Sophie Halverson? And what was she hiding beneath that veil? Session 2. A Wedding of Secrets. The Halverson estate was adorned in white roses and twinkling chandeliers. A scene straight out of a fairy tale. Guests whispered behind the delicate clinks of champagne glasses, their curiosity barely concealed. A Whitmore wedding was always a spectacle, and tonight was no different. Yet, Logan Whitmore stood at the altar, his face devoid of the joy that should accompany a groom. His jaw was clenched, his fingers curled into fists at his sides. This was a performance, a carefully orchestrated play that he had been forced into. And across from him, standing gracefully in an exquisite lace gown, was Sophie Halverson, the bride he barely knew. And she was still wearing the veil. It fell in delicate waves over her face, obscuring her completely, leaving only those piercing gray eyes visible beneath the sheer fabric. Logan exhaled slowly, his irritation simmering beneath the surface. This was absurd. The murmurs in the crowd were deafening. Why won't she remove it? What is she hiding? He doesn't even know what she looks like. Logan gritted his teeth, but Sophie remained unshaken. She stood tall, her posture regal, unbothered by the rumors swirling around them. The officiant cleared his throat. "Do you, Logan Whitmore, take Sophie Halverson to be your lawfully wedded wife? To have and to hold? For richer or for poorer? In sickness and in health? Until death do you part?" Silence. For a moment, Logan considered walking away. He could refuse. He could break free. But then, his father's words echoed in his mind. "You walk away, you lose everything." Logan's jaw tightened. He looked at Sophie, composed, unreadable, an enigma wrapped in lace. She wasn't pleading. She wasn't begging for his love. This was just as much a business transaction for her as it was for him. And for some reason, that realization sent a sharp, unexpected pang through his chest. He inhaled deeply. "I do." A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. The officiant turned to Sophie. "And do you, Sophie Halverson, take Logan Whitmore to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Logan watched her closely, searching for hesitation, for any sign of reluctance. But Sophie's voice was steady, unwavering. "I do." The officiant smiled. "You may now kiss the bride." Logan froze. For the first time, Sophie's body tensed ever so slightly. He could feel the eyes of hundreds of guests watching, waiting. He hesitated for only a second before leaning in. And Sophie turned her head, just slightly. Just enough, so that his lips met the sheer fabric of her veil instead of her skin. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some whispers filled with intrigue, others with disbelief. Logan pulled back, eyes narrowing, his irritation spiking again. Sophie held his gaze, and though her face was hidden, he could sense something behind those eyes. Defiance. The applause erupted around them, drowning out the tension between them. But Logan barely heard it. Instead, he found himself wondering, what exactly had he just married into? The Blackwood estate, Logan's family home, was eerily quiet that night. After hours of forced smiles, polite conversation, and whispers behind their backs, Logan and Sophie had finally retreated to the master suite. Now, Standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the sprawling estate, Logan swirled the whiskey in his glass, his gaze fixed on the night sky. Behind him, Sophie stood near the vanity, her movements slow and deliberate. Still wearing the veil, he exhaled sharply, setting his drink down. "Are you going to take that off? Or am I supposed to spend my life married to a ghost?" Sophie didn't react. She simply reached up, her slender fingers curling around the delicate lace. And then, slowly, deliberately, she began to lift it. Logan didn't blink. The veil slid away, and Logan's breath hitched. She was stunning, not just beautiful, but striking, in a way that was almost unnerving. High cheekbones, flawless skin, full lips that were pressed into an unreadable line. But it was her eyes, those sharp, stormy gray eyes, that sent something unfamiliar coursing through him. Logan had expected anything but this. And she had known that. That was why she had kept the veil on. Because she had wanted him to think the worst. She had wanted to see how he would treat her before he knew the truth. A slow, knowing smile curved Sophie's lips. "You seem surprised, husband." Logan blinked, his mind racing. "You," he exhaled a short laugh, shaking his head. "You played me. I simply let you make your own assumptions." Logan's amusement faded, replaced by frustration. "Why?" Sophie turned away, unfastening her earrings. "Because, Logan," she said softly, "I needed to know who I was marrying." Logan stared at her, his mind a whirlwind. He had judged her, dismissed her as a business deal, a burden. And yet, from the very beginning, she had been the one testing him. A sharp knock at the door pulled them both from the moment. One of the household staff entered, bowing slightly. "Mr. Whitmore, there's an urgent call for you from your father." Logan ran a frustrated hand through his hair, glancing at Sophie once more. This conversation wasn't over. Without another word, he turned and left the room, leaving his wife standing there, the veil discarded on the vanity. And for the first time, Logan realized this marriage was going to be far more complicated than he had ever imagined. Session 3. The Art of the Game. The moment Logan stepped out of the master suite, he couldn't shake the image of Sophie standing there, veil in hand, her gaze unwavering as if she had known all along exactly how he would react. She had played him, tested him. And that realization both infuriated him and intrigued him. The phone call from his father was brief, filled with corporate formalities and thinly veiled warnings about the importance of maintaining appearances in this marriage. Logan had barely listened, his mind stuck on one thing. Sophie Halverson was not the meek, powerless woman he had expected. And that changed everything. The next morning, Logan descended the grand staircase, fully expecting to find Sophie avoiding him, keeping to her quarters like a dutiful, silent bride. Instead, he found her already seated in the dining room, sipping tea as if she had lived in the estate her entire life. She was calm, poised, unbothered, a stark contrast to the hurricane raging inside him. Logan poured himself a cup of coffee, then took the seat across from her. They sat in silence, the only sound the faint clinking of silverware against china. Then, unable to contain his curiosity any longer, he leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "So," he mused, voice smooth but edged with challenge, "are you going to tell me why you did it?" Sophie glanced up, completely unruffled. "Did what?" His lips twitched with irritation. "You know exactly what I'm talking about." She set her teacup down gently. "You mean why I let you assume I was hiding some terrible secret under my veil?" Logan's eyes narrowed. "Yes." Sophie folded her hands neatly in her lap. "Because I wanted to see what kind of man I was marrying." Logan scoffed. "And? What's your verdict?" Sophie tilted her head slightly, studying him in a way that made his skin prickle with awareness. "You're arrogant," she said, completely matter of fact, used to having things your way. You expect control, and when it's taken from you, you lash out. But, she paused, her lips curving just slightly. "You're not cruel." Logan blinked. That wasn't the answer he had been expecting. Not cruel. For some reason, the words settled deeper than they should have. He exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "That's surprisingly fair." Sophie smirked, picking up her tea again. "I thought so." Logan watched her, his irritation shifting into curiosity. She was sharp, observant, unshaken by him, which was rare. "I guess now it's my turn," he murmured, leaning forward slightly. Sophie raised a brow. For what? To figure you out. A small laugh escaped her lips, soft, amused, dangerous. I wish you luck, Mr. Whitmore, she said smoothly, taking a sip of her tea. Because no one ever has. Logan's pulse quickened, though he wasn't sure why. Sophie Halverson was not the woman he had expected. And now, for the first time since this arranged farce had begun, he was intrigued. The shift in power. For the next few days, they fell into an unspoken dance. Sophie moved gracefully through his world, attending formal events, holding conversations with high society elites as if she had been born to it. She was polite but firm, charming yet distant. She never sought his attention, never clung to him the way other women had in the past. And somehow, that made him notice her even more. He watched her, in ways he hadn't intended to. The way she listened intently during meetings when she thought no one was watching. The way she preferred black coffee over sweetened tea. The way she never spoke unless she had something meaningful to say. And the way she never let anyone, including him, rattle her. One afternoon, he found her in the library, flipping through the pages of a thick leather-bound book. "You read business strategy?" he asked, leaning against the doorway. Sophie didn't even glance up. "I read everything." Logan smirked. "That explains a lot." She finally looked up, those storm gray eyes pinning him in place. "And yet you still underestimate me." Logan chuckled, stepping further into the room. "I don't underestimate you, Sophie." He tilted his head. "I just don't know what you want." For the first time, something flickered in her expression. Something almost vulnerable. But then, just as quickly, she masked it, turning the page of her book. "Good," she murmured. "Let's keep it that way." Logan felt a strange, unfamiliar sensation in his chest. A challenge. She was challenging him. And Logan Whitmore never walked away from a challenge. An unexpected rescue. One evening, they attended an exclusive gala. A gathering of the wealthiest families in the country. Logan had fully expected another night of obligatory small talk and empty smiles. But the night took a sharp turn when he overheard a hushed conversation near the bar. "She's beautiful, but something's off about her. Maybe that's why she kept her face hidden. Do you think she's manipulating him?" Logan's blood ran cold. It wasn't just gossip. It was a calculated attack on Sophie. Before he even thought about it, he was moving, stepping between the men and their whispered cruelty. Their eyes widened slightly when they saw him. "Mr. Whitmore," one of them greeted smoothly, as if they hadn't just been tearing his wife apart behind her back. Logan gave them a cold, razor-sharp smile. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice dangerously soft, "if you have something to say about my wife, I suggest you say it to me." The tension spiked. They backpedaled immediately, laughing it off, muttering excuses. But Logan's gaze was like steel, his stance unyielding. They knew. He had heard everything, and he would not forget it. When Logan returned to Sophie's side, he didn't mention it, but she knew. Her gaze flickered to his, as if she could sense the shift in him. And for the first time since their marriage began, Logan realized something. This wasn't just a business deal anymore. Because now it was personal. Session 4, the Unspoken Pact. The whispers from the gala still echoed in Logan's mind long after the last champagne glass had been emptied. It bothered him, far more than it should have. Not just the rumors, not just the speculation. It was the way they spoke about Sophie, as if she were nothing more than a game piece on the chessboard of high society. And perhaps what infuriated him the most was the realization that before now, he had been no different. But things had changed. He had changed. The walk home. Logan and Sophie walked in silence as they left the gala, the cool night air swirling around them. Her emerald gown shimmered under the soft glow of the streetlights, her movements as fluid and composed as ever. But Logan felt the shift, the way she was a little too quiet. The way her grip on her clutch was just a fraction too tight. Finally, he broke the silence. "You heard them." Sophie didn't look at him. "Does it matter?" Logan clenched his jaw. "Yes." She let out a small, mirthless laugh. "Logan, I've spent my entire life hearing whispers like that." Tonight was nothing new. Something tightened in his chest. He stopped walking, catching her wrist gently. "It should be." Sophie finally met his gaze. And for the first time, he saw it. A flicker of exhaustion behind her carefully guarded expression. She had built a wall around herself, one even he hadn't noticed before. And suddenly, Logan hated that she had needed to. His voice softened. Why do you let them talk about you like that? Sophie held his gaze, then exhaled. Because fighting every battle isn't always the answer. Logan frowned. And letting people walk over you is? Sophie's lips curved slightly, not quite a smile. Logan, I don't let people walk over me. And just like that, she slipped her hand from his grip and continued walking, leaving him standing there, watching her, and realizing she wasn't just strong, she was stronger than anyone gave her credit for. A different kind of war. The next morning, Logan found himself in the study, his thoughts consumed by Sophie, by her silence, by her patience, by the way she absorbed cruelty like armor, rather than lashing out in retaliation. And he realized she had been fighting her battles alone for a long time. That didn't sit well with him. So when his father called, likely to check in on whether he and Sophie were behaving as a proper society couple, Logan didn't hold back. "You will shut down every single rumor about my wife," he said coldly, his tone leaving no room for argument. "And if I hear so much as another whisper about her from anyone in our circle, they won't just lose my business, they'll lose their standing." His father was silent for a long moment. Then, interesting, Logan's grip tightened on the phone. "What the hell does that mean?" "It means you're finally acting like a husband." Logan. The words sent a jolt through him, sharp, unexpected. And as he hung up, he realized something unsettling. He wasn't protecting Sophie because of the contract. He was protecting her because he wanted to. The woman behind the curtain. Later that evening, Logan entered the library, his safe space, only to find Sophie already there. Seated by the fire, a book resting open in her lap. Her veil was still in place, but something about her posture was lighter. Perhaps it was the way she let her fingers lazily trace the corner of the pages. Perhaps it was the way she looked peaceful, rather than guarded. Without thinking, Logan grabbed a book from the shelf and sat across from her. Sophie arched a brow. "You read?" Logan smirked. "Shocking. I know." She didn't reply, but something in her expression softened. They read in comfortable silence, the fire crackling between them. And for the first time, Logan realized he liked this quiet companionship, this understanding without words. With Sophie, he didn't feel the need to perform, to be the arrogant CEO, the controlled businessman, the man who had it all together. He could just be. And maybe, just maybe, so could she. The first real glimpse. Days passed, then weeks. Something shifted between them, not dramatically, but subtly. They still argued, they still clashed, but there was a new rhythm to their marriage now. A partnership, an unspoken pact. One evening, as Logan returned from a grueling business meeting, he found Sophie waiting for him in the study. Not reading, not politely avoiding conversation. Waiting. She was still veiled, but there was something different about her posture. "I heard about the deal," she said. "It fell through, didn't it?" Logan sighed, dropping onto the couch. Completely. Sophie tilted her head. "What happened?" He exhaled. "Too many power-hungry men in one room." Sophie let out a soft laugh. "So, every business meeting ever?" Logan chuckled despite himself. "Pretty much." Sophie was quiet for a moment. Then, "Would you like to know what I would have done?" Logan froze. Slowly, he lifted his gaze to hers. And for the first time, he saw it. The edge of ambition behind her calm demeanor. The sharpness of her mind, hidden beneath layers of composure. He leaned forward, intrigued. "Go on." And Sophie smiled, like she had been waiting for him to ask all along. The woman he never saw coming. Sophie didn't hold back. She laid out her thoughts, her strategies, her observations about the company Logan was dealing with, flaws in their approach that even he hadn't caught. And Logan listened, not because he felt obligated, but because, for the first time in his life, someone was speaking his language. She wasn't just beautiful. She wasn't just strong. She was brilliant. When she finished, Logan leaned back, exhaling slowly. "That," he said, shaking his head in quiet disbelief, "was impressive." Sophie didn't look smug, didn't gloat. She simply shrugged. "I told you, Logan. I read everything." He laughed, the sound genuine. And for the first time, he wondered if he had severely underestimated his wife. And if so, that meant Sophie Halverson was the most dangerous woman he had ever met. And God help him, he liked it. Session 5, The Shift. Logan couldn't shake the feeling. Something had changed between him and Sophie. It wasn't just the way they spoke to each other now. It wasn't just the way she matched his intellect and challenged him in ways no one else ever had. It was the way he noticed things about her. The way she moved through a room with quiet confidence. The way she listened before speaking, choosing her words carefully, deliberately. The way her presence had started to feel necessary. And that realization? It terrified him. A private proposal. Logan wasn't one to avoid problems, but when it came to Sophie, he had no idea how to define what they had become. Which was why, when she found him in the study later that evening, he felt an inexplicable sense of tension. Not the kind that led to fights. The kind that led to something else entirely. "You were right," he said, closing the file in front of him. Sophie raised an eyebrow. "I'm always right. You'll have to be more specific." Logan huffed a quiet laugh, shaking his head. "About the merger. The revised terms worked." Sophie tilted her head, studying him. "I assume that means you owe me a thank you?" Logan smirked. "I don't think those exact words ever left my mouth." Sophie stepped closer, and for some reason, Logan felt his heartbeat pick up. "You're welcome," she said softly. Something shifted in the air between them, something neither of them were quite ready to acknowledge. Logan cleared his throat, breaking the moment. "How do you feel about working with me more? Not just behind closed doors?" Sophie hesitated, then gave him a look. "Are you offering me a job, Logan?" He shrugged, feigning nonchalance. "I'm offering you an opportunity." Sophie considered him for a long moment. Then, "I accept." And for the first time in a long time, Logan felt like he had won something worth keeping. The power couple. Sophie's first official public appearance as Logan's wife, not just in name, but in action, came faster than expected. A corporate gala, filled with high-profile investors, media, and every self-important socialite looking to sniff out a scandal. It was the first time Sophie stood beside Logan, not behind him, and the impact was immediate. She was poised, intelligent, effortlessly composed. When she spoke, people listened. When she moved, they watched. And Logan, for the first time, realized just how dangerous his wife could be. Not because she was ruthless, but because she was smarter than any of them had given her credit for. Including him. As the evening progressed, he noticed the shift in conversations. People weren't whispering about her veil anymore. They were whispering about her. About the way she had grasped the nuances of business discussions so quickly. About the way she had challenged an investor's weak argument without a flicker of hesitation. About the way Logan looked at her, as if he wasn't quite sure how he had ended up here. As if he wasn't sure whether he was losing control of this situation, or finally gaining something real. The question he couldn't answer. The night ended with Logan and Sophie stepping out onto the private balcony, away from the watchful eyes of the guests. Sophie sighed, rubbing her temple. "That was exhausting." Logan smirked. "You handled it better than half the CEOs in that room." Sophie turned to him, her gray eyes flickering with something unreadable. "Did you expect me not to?" Logan hesitated. Then, quietly, "No." Because he hadn't. And that was the problem. He had underestimated her. But worse than that, he had underestimated how much he liked watching her prove him wrong. Sophie studied him for a moment, then exhaled. "Why did you agree to this marriage?" The question caught him off guard. Logan didn't answer immediately. Because, for the first time, he wasn't sure what the truth was anymore. At first, it had been about duty. About business. About keeping his family's legacy intact. But now, it felt like something else entirely. Finally, he said, "I thought I didn't have a choice." Sophie nodded slowly. "And now?" Logan looked at her, at the way the wind played with the strands of hair escaping her updo. At the way she had become something far more than a business arrangement. "I don't know," he admitted. And for the first time since meeting her, Logan Halverson felt completely and utterly out of his depth. The moment he couldn't forget. That night, long after they had returned to the estate, Logan found himself standing outside Sophie's bedroom door. He didn't know what had brought him there. Curiosity? Frustration? Or something he wasn't ready to name. After a long moment, he lifted his hand to knock. But before he could, the door cracked open slightly. Sophie stood there, bathed in the soft glow of the bedside lamp. Her veil removed, her face fully visible for the first time outside of the public eye. And God help him, she was breathtaking. Logan froze, unable to look away. Sophie didn't speak, she just watched him, waiting. And Logan, for once in his life, had nothing to say. Because in that moment, he realized something. It wasn't just about seeing her face. It was about seeing her. And he had never been more terrified in his life. Session 6. The breaking point. Logan had never felt this unbalanced in his entire life. The cold, calculated world he had built around himself, one of control, logic, and business transactions, was slipping through his fingers. And the cause? Sophie. Not because she was a mystery anymore. Not because of the veil she once wore. Not even because of the marriage he had fought against. It was because, for the first time, he wanted something that wasn't part of the plan. And that something was her. The distance he couldn't stand. Logan tried to ignore it. He threw himself into work. Business deals, negotiations, anything to avoid the way he felt when she was near. But avoidance wasn't enough. Because Sophie was everywhere. At meetings, at family dinners, in the halls of their home. And most of all, in his mind. It was the little things. The way she smiled slightly when she proved him wrong in business discussions. The way she curled up in the library late at night with a book. Her fingers absently tracing the rim of her teacup. The way she didn't flinch around him anymore. Her gray eyes meeting his without hesitation. Logan had spent so long resenting the distance between them. And now? It was driving him insane. Because suddenly, he didn't want the space anymore. A storm behind closed doors. The breaking point came one evening. After yet another public function where they had to pretend. Pretend that their marriage was perfect. Pretend that they were happy. Pretend that Logan wasn't burning with frustration every time Sophie smiled at someone else. The moment they stepped into their home, Logan had had enough. Are you ever going to talk to me? Sophie stopped mid-step, turning to face him. Excuse me? Logan threw his jacket onto the chair, his hands clenching. This game we're playing, he said, his voice tight. The perfect wife, the business partnership, the polite smiles in public and the silence in private. Are we ever going to be real with each other? Sophie? Sophie's expression didn't waver, but he saw it, the brief flicker of something in her eyes. And that only pushed him further. You act like this marriage is just another deal. He continued, stepping closer. Like you don't care. Like this is just another role you've accepted. Sophie inhaled sharply. And what about you, Logan? He froze. You talk about pretending, she said, her voice low, steady, but filled with something that hit him like a knife. But weren't you the one who said this marriage was nothing more than a contract? Logan opened his mouth, but she didn't let him speak. You never wanted this. Her voice dropped slightly. So tell me, Logan, why does it bother you so much now? Silence. Because he didn't know how to answer that. Or rather, he did. He just wasn't ready to say it. The truth he couldn't escape. The next morning, Logan woke up with one realization. He had two choices. He could keep lying to himself. Keep pretending that Sophie was just another responsibility. Just another duty. Just another name tied to his. Or he could admit the truth. That somewhere along the way, he had stopped seeing Sophie as an obligation. That he had started wanting her in a way that had nothing to do with their arrangement. And that truth? It scared the hell out of him. But Logan had never been one to run from fear. And this time would be no different. So that night, as he stood outside her bedroom door, he didn't hesitate. He knocked once. And when Sophie opened it, looking at him with that same unreadable expression, he finally said the words he had been avoiding for far too long. I don't want this to be fake anymore. Session 7. The moment everything changed. Sophie didn't move, didn't speak, didn't even blink. She simply stared at Logan, as if trying to decide whether she had heard him correctly. The weight of his words hung heavy between them, filling the silence like a storm about to break. Logan had always been a man who controlled every aspect of his life. But in this moment, he was completely at her mercy. A line crossed. Sophie's fingers tightened slightly around the edge of her bedroom door. This isn't a game, Logan, she said finally, her voice quieter than usual. I know. Then why now? Logan exhaled, running a hand through his hair before meeting her gaze again. Because I've spent weeks, months, lying to myself. He admitted, convincing myself that I could keep pretending this marriage doesn't matter. That you don't matter. Sophie's lips parted slightly, as if she hadn't expected his honesty. But I can't do it anymore. Logan continued, his voice rough, filled with something raw and real. I don't want to just share a house with you. Sophie, I want more. Sophie's breath caught, but she stayed silent. I want to know you. Not just as my wife. Not just as my business partner, but as you. Logan swallowed hard. And I want you to know me too. The real me. Not the version my family expects. Not the man who was forced into this marriage. Just me. For the first time, Sophie looked shaken. She had spent so long being in control, guarding her emotions, keeping her walls high, but Logan had just broken through them. And she didn't know how to handle it. The risk of falling. Sophie's grip on the door loosened slightly. Her nails no longer digging into the wood. She searched Logan's face, looking for deception, for doubt, for anything that would make this easier to walk away from. But she found none of it. And that was what scared her the most. Because if she let herself believe him, if she let herself hope, then that meant there was something real here. Something that had nothing to do with business, duty, or expectations. And real things? Real things could break. The decision. Logan could see the war in her eyes. The battle between trust and fear. So he did the only thing he could. He took one step closer. And then another. Until they were close enough that he could feel the warmth of her skin. See the faint rise and fall of her chest as she tried to steady herself. Sophie, he murmured, his voice lower now. I don't know where this leads. I don't know what this becomes. She swallowed. But I know that if I walk away right now, I'll regret it for the rest of my life. Her lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to say something, but the words wouldn't come. So Logan did what he had been wanting to do for so long. He reached out, slowly, giving her time to stop him. And when she didn't, he brushed his fingers gently against hers. Sophie sucked in a sharp breath, as if the contact was more intimate than anything else they had ever shared. Tell me to stop, Logan whispered. She didn't. Instead, her fingers tightened around his. And just like that, everything changed. Session 8, a night of truths. The moment Sophie didn't pull away, Logan felt everything shift. It wasn't just the way her fingers tightened around his, it was what it meant. For so long, they had been caught in a game of distance and defiance, of unspoken words and unacknowledged emotions. But now, there were no more walls between them. And Logan wasn't going to let this moment slip away. The unveiling begins. Sophie's gaze flickered downward, as if she was struggling to process what was happening. Logan lifted his free hand slowly, reaching toward the veil that had kept her hidden from him since the moment they met. She didn't stop him. His fingers brushed the delicate fabric, and he could feel the way her breath hitched, the way her body tensed slightly. He hesitated, giving her one last chance to stop him. But Sophie didn't move, didn't protest, didn't say a word. So, with careful hands, Logan lifted the veil, and for the first time, he saw her. A face unseen, a heart laid bare. Logan's breath caught in his throat. Sophie was beautiful, not just in the way that people whispered about beauty, not just in the way that turned heads at grand parties. She was the kind of beautiful that made his chest tighten, that made the world tilt slightly off balance. High cheekbones, smooth skin, full lips that were parted slightly, as if waiting for him to say something. But it wasn't just her face that stunned him. It was her eyes. Logan had always seen glimpses of them behind the veil, those piercing gray eyes that held secrets deeper than the ocean. But now, without anything between them, he could see everything: strength, fear, hope, and something else. Something that looked dangerously close to trust. Breaking the silence, Sophie was the one who finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Well? Logan let out a soft, almost breathless laugh, shaking his head. You've been hiding this from me? She blinked. I wasn't hiding. Logan. He arched a brow. No? Then what do you call months of keeping yourself behind a veil? Sophie hesitated, then sighed. I needed to know, she admitted. Logan's amusement faded slightly. Know what? If you could see me, she said softly. Not just my face, not just the surface, but me. His chest tightened at her words. Because suddenly, everything made sense. Her walls, her silence, the way she never let herself be fully vulnerable. She had been waiting, testing, to see if he was worth the risk. And now? Now, it was his turn to prove something. The kiss that changed everything. Logan didn't think, didn't hesitate, didn't allow himself a second to doubt what he was about to do. He tilted her chin up gently, holding her gaze for a single, breathless moment. And then, he kissed her. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't desperate. It was slow, deliberate, the kind of kiss that meant something. Sophie froze for a second, caught between instinct and emotion. Then, slowly, she melted into him, her fingers clutching the front of his shirt, as if she needed something to hold on to. Logan felt it, the way she trembled slightly, the way her breath mixed with his. And God help him, but he knew, this wasn't just a kiss. It was a promise that they were no longer pretending, that the marriage that had started as a transaction had become something real. That neither of them were walking away from this. Not now. Not ever. Session 9. Love Unmasked. The night was silent, but the world inside Logan's chest was anything but. He could still feel the ghost of her lips against his. The way she had trembled slightly before leaning into him. That kiss, that moment, had changed everything. And now? Now, there was no going back. A new beginning. Sophie stayed close. Not just in body, but in presence. In spirit. In something neither of them dared name just yet. She watched Logan with a quiet curiosity, her fingers still brushing against the edges of her unveiled face, as if adjusting to the weight of being seen. For so long, she had been the woman behind the veil. But now, she was Sophie Halverson, and Logan, her husband, was looking at her like she was the only thing that mattered. Sophie. Logan's voice was low, steady. She blinked, her gaze flickering up to meet his. Why now? He asked. Sophie exhaled. Because it was time. He tilted his head slightly. Time for what? For you to know the truth. She murmured. Logan swallowed, his throat dry. And what is the truth? Sophie hesitated, then stepped closer. So close he could feel her warmth. Could see the way the firelight danced in her gray eyes. That I was scared, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Scared that if you saw me, really saw me, you'd turn away. Logan's jaw tightened. Why would you ever think that? She let out a soft laugh, one that held years of doubt and hesitation. Because that's what people do. Logan, she said quietly. They judge, they assume, they see what they want to see. And I wasn't sure if I was ready for that. Logan shook his head, his expression unreadable. I never wanted to judge you, Sophie, he said firmly. I just wanted to understand you. Sophie studied him, searching for any trace of deception, but there was none. Just Logan, steady, unyielding, hers. And for the first time since this marriage began, she believed him. The shift between them, days passed, then weeks, and the shift between them was impossible to ignore. There were no more carefully measured conversations, no more tense silences. Instead, there were stolen glances across the dining table, soft brushes of fingers when they walked side by side, late-night talks in front of the fireplace, where Logan found himself learning everything about her. How she took her tea. How she secretly loved to read crime novels. How she had always dreamed of running a foundation for women like her, women who had once been cast aside, underestimated. And Logan? Logan found himself wanting to give her everything she had ever been denied. But the thing that shook him the most? Sophie, for the first time, was letting him in. She was laughing, smiling, softening in his presence. And Logan realized something that terrified him more than anything else. He wanted her, not just as his wife in name, not just as a partner in the business. He wanted her as his. Entirely. Completely. And he wasn't sure he had the strength to hold himself back anymore. The night it all changed. It happened late one evening. The rain pattered softly against the grand estate windows. The storm outside no match for the one inside his chest. Logan found her in the library, curled up in a chair, bathed in candlelight, her fingers skimming the pages of a book. He didn't hesitate, didn't give himself time to second guess. He walked toward her, and when she looked up, something in her gaze shifted. Neither of them spoke, but Logan saw it, saw the same want, the same need, the same longing reflected right back at him. Sophie. Her breath caught. He leaned down, slowly, carefully, giving her every chance to pull away. But she didn't. Her fingers lifted, hesitantly, brushing against his jaw. Logan exhaled sharply, every ounce of restraint breaking in that moment. And then he kissed her, not like the first time. This was different. This was desperate, raw, filled with every unspoken emotion that had been building for months. Sophie gasped into his mouth, her fingers gripping his shirt, pulling him closer. Logan groaned, deepening the kiss, his hands tangling in her hair. And in that moment, nothing else mattered. Not their past. Not the way this marriage had started. Not the world outside. Just them. Just this. And Logan knew. He was never letting her go. Session 10. A love that was always meant to be. The night stretched long, the air thick with something neither of them dared name. Logan held Sophie against him, their foreheads resting together, their breaths uneven, trembling. The firelight flickered, casting soft golden hues across her features, the face she had once hidden. The face he now cherished more than anything else. It had started as a game, a transaction, an arrangement that neither had chosen. But now, this was real, and Logan was terrified, because he knew, he was in love with his wife. The truth in the silence. Neither spoke for a long while. Sophie remained in his arms, her breathing steady, her fingers idly tracing the fabric of his shirt, as if memorizing the feel of him. Finally, Logan broke the silence. "I should have seen you sooner," he murmured. Sophie looked up, her gray eyes shimmering in the dim light. "What do you mean?" He cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing against her skin, as if trying to convey the words he couldn't yet say. "I spent so much time fighting this," he admitted, "trying to push you away, trying to convince myself that this marriage meant nothing." Sophie's lips parted, but she didn't speak. Logan swallowed, his voice thick with emotion. "But you were always right in front of me," he continued. "And he exhaled sharply. "I was too damn blind to see you for who you were." Sophie's eyes softened. "Maybe I wasn't ready to be seen yet," she whispered. Logan let out a short laugh, shaking his head. "No, Sophie, you were always there. I was just too much of an idiot to appreciate you." A small smile played at the corner of her lips. "Well, you were a little bit of an idiot." Logan chuckled, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Fair." For a moment, everything felt light, but then Sophie's fingers curled into the fabric of his shirt again, and her expression turned serious. "Logan." He froze at the way she said his name, soft, hesitant, filled with meaning. "I need to know something," she murmured. "Did you ever, before I took off the veil, did you ever think about?" She trailed off, biting her lip. Logan tilted her chin up, forcing her to look at him. "I was falling for you long before that night, Sophie," he said without hesitation. "Long before I ever saw your face." Her breath caught. "You were the one thing I couldn't stop thinking about," he admitted. "You challenged me. You made me better. I just didn't want to admit it." Her eyes searched his, looking for any sign of doubt. She found none, and for the first time, she believed him completely. A future built together. The days that followed were different. Lighter, softer. They weren't just existing in the same space anymore. They were living together, building something real. Logan would wake up to find Sophie already in the garden, her hands covered in soil, tending to the flowers she had planted months ago. He'd bring her coffee without a word, just sitting beside her as she worked, watching the way she smiled to herself when a bloom finally opened. At night, Sophie would find him in his study, reading over business contracts, but now, instead of avoiding her, he'd look up and motion for her to sit beside him. She started helping him more, offering insight on things he had never considered before. And to his surprise, Logan listened. He valued her, he trusted her, and somewhere along the way, she had become the most important part of his life. The final step. Months passed, then a year. Their love grew, not in grand declarations, but in the quiet moments that made up their days. Logan had never been a man who needed words to prove what he felt. But Sophie? Sophie deserved everything. So one evening, as they walked along the cliffs near their estate, the ocean waves crashing below them, Logan stopped. Sophie turned, confused. "Logan?" He took a deep breath, reaching into his pocket. Then he pulled out a ring. Not the one from their wedding. Not the one chosen for the contract. This one was different. It was simple, yet stunning, a symbol of everything they had become together. Sophie's breath hitched. "I never got to ask you properly," Logan said, his voice low, rough with emotion. Sophie stared at him, eyes wide. "Marry me," he murmured. "Not because of an arrangement. Not because of our families. Just because I love you." Sophie let out a shaky laugh, tears slipping down her cheeks. "You idiot," she whispered. "We're already married." Logan grinned. "Yeah, but not like this." Sophie bit her lip, her entire body trembling. Then, she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, "Logan, I'll marry you." Logan slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into a deep, slow kiss, one that sealed every promise between them. And for the first time, there was no veil, no secrets, no doubts, just them, together, forever. Epilogue. A love that was always destined. Years later, Logan would sit in his office, watching Sophie from the balcony of their home. She stood in the garden, laughing as their little girl ran through the flowers, her tiny hands grasping at the petals. Logan smiled. This was his life now. Not the one he had planned, not the one he had expected, but the one he wouldn't trade for anything. He stepped outside, wrapping his arms around Sophie from behind, pressing a soft kiss to her temple. She leaned into him, sighing in contentment. "Thinking about something?" she asked. Logan smirked. "Just how lucky I am." Sophie rolled her eyes but smiled, turning in his arms. "You really were an idiot in the beginning, weren't you?" she teased. Logan chuckled. "Yeah, but I figured it out eventually." She kissed him then, soft, lingering, filled with the warmth of a love that had never wavered. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, Logan knew he had finally found everything he had ever needed. In her, the woman who had once hidden behind a veil, and the love he had been blind to see. But now, he saw everything, and he never planned to let it go. If this story has touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe to Millionaire Love Stories. Have love and resilience ever changed your life? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your story. Subscribe for more stories of love, transformation, and the power of connection. Together, let's believe in the magic of love.